For me, if I want to make some visualizations that tell a specific story, typically they're going to go into a presentation or a book or a report or something like that, so they're static visualizations. And I don't think there's a better tool for Python users than Matplotlib. Now, you could ask why Python, right? And obviously, I'm totally biased since I've been using Python for a long time. But I did make a Coursera course a few years ago, and in that course, I used Matplotlib, I used Seaborn, I used Plotly, and then I did stuff with Tableau and Excel, and I basically recreated all these plots in these different tools, right? And my take on that is that, the sort of no-code stuff is great for when you're in the sandbox, but really when you want to start putting these small tweaks and cleanups to your plot, it's either impossible or very difficult to do that with other tools.
Today's guest is Matt Harrison, best-selling author, Python educator, and expert in practical data visualization. In this episode, we'll explore why communication is the most underrated skill in data science, Matt's clear method for creating visualizations that truly tell a story, common visualization mistakes every data scientist makes and how to fix them, and why simplicity, not complexity, is your key to becoming influential through data. Don't forget to subscribe to Data Neighbor wherever you listen to podcasts and YouTube, and drop a like and comment below. It keeps us bringing you great content like this. With that, let's dive into our chat with Matt Harrison. Hey everyone, welcome back to Data Neighbors with Hais, Ravi, and Sean. So today we're joined by someone who's taught thousands of people how to use Python and think like a practical data scientist, Matt Harrison. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for letting me hop on.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So Matt, for our listeners, Matt's the author of a series of books on data science, Python, visualization, including Effective Pandas. I've got his book, Effective Visualization, right here. Yeah, and he's built a reputation for teaching these topics in a way that I think is actually like pretty useful in real world workflows for your day-to-day job. So today we're going to dive into a topic that every data scientist and analyst wrestles with, the most underrated skill of a data person, and that's how to communicate insights effectively. Whether you're in product or analytics or ML, your work is only valuable if people can understand it. And happy to kind of like jump into this with you, Matt, in terms of, how do we not only find insights, but visualize them and communicate to our stakeholders and our partners.
Yeah, excited to share. It's super being able to communicate well and tell the story that your boss needs to hear or maybe doesn't need to hear is an important skill.
So maybe to kick it off, so you've taught Python to like kind of everyone from analysts to engineers, and you're well known for your like Effective Pandas book. What made you decide to focus on visualization in this new book?
Yeah, I guess I'm just scratching my itch. I have a series of books for Python, Pandas. I've got a Polars book and advanced Python book. And I felt that, there's a lot of books out there that cover the theory of visualization. And I've got a bunch of them on back here, Tufts and, Show Me the Numbers. And, O'Reilly has various books on visualization. And they all talk about the theory and they talk about colors and, how you make something darker, lighter, and they give you all this theory, which is great. And they have a bunch of examples. And then you have, on the other side, you have like a bunch of books that are like, here's Matplotlib and here's 500 things you can do with Matplotlib. Mm-hmm. And I felt like there aren't a lot of books that like say, here's Matplotlib and here's how you tell a story with Matplotlib. And so that's what I set out to do, is to sort of bridge the gap. Like there's a bunch of theory books that are great, but how do I put that in practice? And that was the goal with Effective Visualization. So it's pretty opinionated and focused on a small segment of data visualization to help people tell the story.
Yeah, why did you choose Matplotlib for the focus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Matplotlib has been around forever, and for better or for worse, it is super powerful. The API isn't particularly consistent. And, you always hear about how people are like, well, in R, we have such smooth thing, libraries, ggplot2 is so awesome, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so my experience is that I've worked for over 10 years teaching people Python in a professional context, and 25 years as a Python programmer. And when I think about, for me, what makes a good visualization, you can get it. The basic visualization is like one or two lines of code for something just very quick and dirty. But when I think of something that is focused and wants to tell a particular story, there are various parts of that visualization, and you can see examples of these if you go to media outlets online, New York Times, Economist, these types of places. And those visualizations that you see that are telling stories these ways aren't plots that you can do in one line of code. And you can't even if you're using whatever, ggplot2 or other plotting libraries to create those types of visualizations, they kind of have to be done by hand. And like I said, I didn't feel like there was any tool or any resource that sort of showed me an opinionated take on visualization. And so for me, if I want to make so again, the book is focused on visualizations that tell a specific story. Typically, they're going to go into a presentation or a book or a report or something like that. So they're static visualizations. And I don't think there's a better tool for Python users than Matplotlib. Now, you could ask why Python, right? And obviously, I'm totally biased since I've been using Python for a long time. But I did make a Coursera course a few years ago, and in that course, I used Matplotlib, I used Seaborn, I used Plotly, and then I did stuff with Tableau and Excel, and I basically recreated all these plots in these different tools, right? And my take on that is that, the sort of no-code stuff is great for when you're in the sandbox, but really when you want to start putting these small tweaks and cleanups to your plot, it's either impossible or very difficult to do that with other tools. But with Matplotlib, it is possible to do.
Yeah, I was actually, me and Hai were talking about this. I feel like I've kind of read a lot of more of the I guess theoretical books. I really like Cole Nussbaumer's book Storytelling with Data. That was kind of got me more into oh, can I make this more like what I see in the newspaper? And I was always doing it at my previous jobs in Tableau, but you did have to kind of to get to what you wanted, you had to constantly query and model the data differently before you went in there and do some hacky stuff. And I was just thinking about it recently, I'm using a lot more Python just because with also the help of LLMs and stuff, I can just be hey, I want to use Matplotlib or I want to use Seaborn or something, but how do I get this one bar just colored? And I do wonder if coding gets easier, if the no code stuff's gonna disappear a little bit more. I don't know.
The existential crisis of programmers getting eaten by AI. Yeah, I mean, I have a take on that right now. My current take on that is that right now I haven't seen any AIs that you can feed it a CSV or an Excel and say, make a plot that tells a story from this that looks whatever, like The Economist. They're not going to be able to do that right now. And, it's possible that they could do that in the future. There'd have to be a lot of back and forth because, to be honest, even when I'm doing this, these are plots that I'm generally back and forthing myself because they're hand laid out, which is one of the reasons why tools like, Plotly or Bokeh, while they're great for interactive stuff, again, the focus of this book is not on interactivity. The focus of this book is here is a plot that goes in a presentation or in a book or on a newspaper and it tells a story, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
To your earlier point, Matt, about you are taking an opinionated approach to kind of visualizations, why do you think opinions have been absent in such a important kind of thing, right?
That's a good question. So as an educator, my day job is teaching folks Python and data science. So I spend a good deal of my time either in person or on Zoom calls teaching these sorts of things. And, you might ask, like, why would someone even want that when you can go on YouTube and you can get a PhD's worth of knowledge, or whatever TikTok or name or social media source you want, or now with AIs, you can get these sorts of answers. And I think one of the really important things is curation, that you want curation, especially with beginners. I think that if you don't know where you're going and you're asking for directions, you're going to get a path, but it might not be the path that exposes you to the warts, the things you need to watch out for, or the sort of hidden tricks that you might not know about. And so I think a lot of people really appreciate, like, we're going to start here and we're going to take you through this path. And I've been doing Python for 25 years, so I'm going to show you, like, here's where people get hung up. Here's how you can make your pandas code better. And I think particularly for visualization, because if you read all these books, right, they're all like art. Here's the science or the theory of color and how to tell stories. And a lot of people who sit in front of computers all day are kind of like, I'm sitting in front of a computer because I don't want to talk to people. I want to work with a computer, right? Which is one of the reasons why communication is a really important skill for data folks. But I think there's probably a feeling that you need some sort of ability with art to be able to make these visualizations, and you're a computer scientist or a data scientist or a data analyst, and so you don't have artistic abilities. So my take is, like, I'm going to give you a framework, and if you walk through this framework, it's going to force you to think about what you need to do to make a plot. I think a lot of people, when they're plotting, they're like, well, I make a line plot and this is how I make a line plot, and then somebody said I need to remove chart junk, so I get rid of my grids. And then after I've gotten rid of my grids, I've made my plot, and that's it, right? I've checked off all the boxes because that's what they've been told, right? But they don't really think about it, like, instead of like, this is a line plot. Instead, I think you should reframe it. It's like, what story am I trying to tell? And how does the line plot tell this effectively? And what other elements do I need to incorporate into that to reinforce or make my point stronger?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited to dive into some of the tips and tricks and like best practices and stuff like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, like we in the industry, we see it a lot. People give it very little thoughts about like what the chart would look like. It's like, hey, I've done the grunt work of organizing the data, cleaning it up, doing all the modeling stuff, getting the insights, and here you go. Here's the defaults package that I get from a charting library, and I just present that, and that's it. But like, as you said, there's so much that goes into it. It's amazing how little it gets talked about.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, I was surprised as I was going through these books, like, where is a book that like shows me with any library how to do this, right? They're all like, we did this with Excel or we did this with whatever, but we're not showing you how we did it, right? Which for me is like, great, but I love the theory, but I also love to see the progression from here's a one-line plot to here's the cleaned up one that would go in a magazine or a newspaper.
I remember a really short story, a really funny story before, which is I was working with a designer on something like an analytics platform of some sort that has a visualization component. And then she gave me these really great, like mock-ups of actually like dummy data sets that I gave her. And I was like, wow, how do you plot these? And she was like, I hand drawn them.
Yeah, Illustrator.
And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's not reproducible, but that's kind of like the holy grail. But anyway,
yeah. I mean, there is an art to it, right? And I don't mean to take away from like professional data visualization people who are like the top of the top making these plots, saying that like, just by following these steps you're going to put yourself up there, because I think there is a lot of art still involved. But I think there's to get to just to get past that initial level and start thinking about not just this is a visualization, but like reframe it all. This is a story that I'm trying to tell. Does this tell my story?
Yeah, I think it's so important. Something I've always realized, it's like getting your story across. There's the time when you're like in the room and you're talking to people and you're walking through them and you don't want their eyes to glaze over when they see the graph and not know what's going on. But then I think actually what's even like The higher risk part is like after the presentation, when your thing starts getting shared around, you're not there to talk about it. And then people start drawing different conclusions from this graph you made. Having that really clear, like even having like the title being like the actual takeaway from what you're trying to get there is so important. Otherwise, then you're caught up in meetings later on where it's like, hey, so-and-so said you did this analysis and it said X, Y, Z. And it's like, no, that's definitely not what I wanted to get across. But I could see how they got to that.
Well, the crazy part is that on most plotting libraries, like title is kind of a first class thing, but it's like you don't have to make a title, right? Like it's like you can make a plot without even having a title. And it's like if you look at these professional plots, they all have titles and subtitles, right? And I don't know any tool that has like subtitle is like a first class thing. When you make a visualization, you provide a subtitle with it.
Yeah, 100%. Maybe getting into the framework a little bit. I know in the book you mentioned like the CLEAR method. Maybe could you tell us a little bit about that approach to start?
Sure. Yeah. So part of the book introduces these CLEAR principles, and that was, again, I think this idea of going through a path, an opinionated path, and giving you, I guess, questions you can ask yourself and think about. And I think if you go through this, potentially you won't change your plot. I imagine that your plot will change quite a bit if you answer these questions. It forces you to reframe that it's like, this is not just a visualization, but this is a story that I want. And so CLEAR stands for color. The C is for color. So, we can go into color theory and all of that, but to me, the important thing isn't, I think with a little bit of color theory, you can do a lot, but oftentimes like the default colors for plots are not great. Like if you do a line plot in Matplotlib with a bunch of lines, it's going to put just every line is a different color, and then it will cycle through them at some point. And again, if you look at like real world professional plots, no one is doing that. They call that a spaghetti plot. But if you, but there are techniques that we can do that if you look at how real world people do this, we can apply those techniques using Matplotlib and Pandas to do that. And then also so limiting your colors, being careful about what colors you choose are all important aspects. So that's the C. The L is for limited plots. And this one might be a little bit, maybe folks think it's a little bit maybe heavy-handed. There's the idea of like removing chart junk and getting rid of anything that tells a story or that doesn't tell the story. And I think that's part of it. But to me, a lot of times I see folks where they're like, I saw some fancy plot somewhere, and so I'm going to reach out and try and make some really fancy plot. And when I was going through the, planning stages of the book, I went to all of these professional data visualization teams and started pulling down samples of what kinds of plots they were making. And I bucketed them into 5 buckets. So we have line plots, we have bar plots, we have scatter plots, we have histograms, which are kind of a subcategory of bar plots, but they're a little different. And then you kind of have the 5th category, which is kind of a catch-all. It's like maps and sometimes some other type of plot. But if you go to these sites, you don't see some of the plots that you would see on, that people post to like Twitter or LinkedIn.
Some like radar thing or like
You don't see a radar plot. You don't see tree maps, things like that.
Nut graphs.
Yeah, but you see like on social media, you see like, here's how to choose your plot, and it's got 40 plots in there.
Yeah.
And it's like you can go through this little thing to choose your plots. And I'm like, yeah, but like pros aren't doing that. They're using basically 5 plots. And so part of the limited is not just like removing chart junk, but it's like, okay, if you want to tell your story, these are kind of the proven plots that folks are using to tell a story. You should really consider if you have to use some other plot type before throwing away these plot types. And so to that point, the book only focuses on, it doesn't talk about maps, it just focuses on those 4 plots, which a lot of people, to them, it's like, come on, Matplotlib makes all of these other types of plots and it does all these other things. It's like, it does, but again, I'm being opinionated, but I'm also like, based on my experience and even like looking at the theory books, right? The theory books aren't showing those other types of plots. They're showing these simple plots. So I think people, a lot of, I once had a colleague who a new version of Python came out, and this colleague proceeded to make a pull request using every feature of the new version of Python. And
Oh man.
and some of them sort of fit in, but the other ones are like, you are just doing this to like either practice your Python or like force us to upgrade Python or whatever, right? But it was like,
Force us to upgrade.
but it's like, chasing like this new novel thing, right? It's not that like new features aren't good per se, but it's like if you can't master these skills, which are like the basics of storytelling that kind of everyone understands, then you really should consider why you aren't. So that, I think that's a little bit opinionated, but it also, again, it's a constraint. And I think oftentimes when we are given these constraints, it forces us to think about what we're doing, and in the end, I think the product is better.
Yeah, I mean too. Also, like just like besides like the fact that like those are good plots, those 5, it's kind of like everyone knows what a bar plot and a line plot is. Like you don't have to explain it. Like some people, you might have to explain a scatter plot a little too, but like line plots and bar plots have been around for a long time. That's just kind of the other part too. It's like you don't have to be like, okay, here, this is what this is saying to you. There's no voiceover.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think I need to wow people with my plot. And it's not like you need to wow them. You need to present something that's simple and like kind of irrefutable, I think. And so using the basic plots just sort of actually, I think, helps you tell your story.
Yeah.
So that's limited. Again, a lot of people say like, oh, you're like, that's a cop out or whatever. And I think it's a constraint that forces you to make better plots. So we got the color, the limited, the E is for explain. And I think this is where a lot of people probably miss out or don't think about this, right? And so generally I say you want to explain with a title, a subtitle, and annotations, right? And you can do those with most tools. They might not be first class elements, but you can like get text into a plot or an arrow into a plot somehow. But again, it goes back to that notion of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you're going to tell them. And so I think of the title and the subtitle are, you have this plot, hopefully it's simple, the colors make it so your eyes, like colors are forcing your eyes to look at a certain thing, right? By maybe muting everything else and making one thing bright or something like that. And then the title maybe gives a short explanation, then the subtitle dives into that a little bit more. And if there's something that's like, that's weird, why is that there? Or you want to draw you want to further focus someone on something else, you can use an annotation to like, hey, in this year this happened, or this is this vehicle that has this whatever miles per gallon versus horsepower or something like that, right? So I think a lot of people really miss out on that, in that like subtitles aren't a first class thing in plotting packages. So people are like, I don't even make a subtitle for my plot. And then annotations, I think people just don't think about that. They're like, well, they should be experts, and then we can sit down and we can talk about the plot, and I can tell them what it is, right? So that's the explain. Kind of tell them with the visuals, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then with the subtitle and title and the annotations, tell them what you're going to tell them again.
Nice.
Yeah. The A in clear is for audience. And again, there might be cases where, your audience has some technical understanding and you're making a plot specifically for them, right? So it's, if I'm doing some machine learning plots, we often use plots for machine learning to validate our models or something like that. I kind of assume that if I'm collaborating with someone else and I'm making those plots, they have some understanding about what's going on there. The audience level understands what's going on. So I want to think about who is my audience and what is appropriate for them. So, there could be something that, well, I think in general, I've said I want to be opinionated, and I think the more I've been, working with folks and helping teach people or train people, I think if you're aiming to be everything to everyone, you're going to kind of either be bland or please no one. And so I really think you do want to have a specific focus on your audience. And I think to some degree, like my book kind of does that, right? It's like, yeah, I get that like some people are going to be upset about my book. Like it doesn't use Plotly. It doesn't show all of these other libraries, right? But you know, I think if you are focused on your audience, it's going to help you think about what story you're going to tell, right? Am I presenting to the CEO? Am I presenting to my colleagues? Am I presenting to, you know, external consumers or external audience? That can change what you share and what is in your visualization.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the final one, which again is not really a first class element in any plotting library that I know of, is references. If you look at like professional visualizations, they will all have at the bottom a reference that states like, here's the data, maybe here's some tweaks that we did to the data or some footnotes or something that you need to know about the data. And like there is no package or there is no plotting library that adds references to your plot. But if you think about it, like I said, you don't want to throw this wild thing out there that like no one can understand. You want to tell them your story with the plot. You want to enforce that with the subtitle and the title and the annotations. And then at the bottom, you want your references to be like irrefutable proof. It's like, this is where I got the data. You can go get the data and you can validate this if you want to. Like, it's not magic, right? And it's just sort of like saying, here it is. You can take the whole thing. And it's sort of all self-contained, right? And if they want to question it, they can, but it's like this is what the data tells you, right? And yeah, we can certainly like adapt the color or maybe the axes or something like that to tell a different story. But I think that, you know, if you look at these professional plots, there's a reason why they put references in there, right? And it's to give you the authority, right? You're not hiding anything. This is what's there.
Yeah, and even beyond that, I feel like does your fellow data analysts and data scientists a favor when inevitably later on someone's like, "Hey, can you refresh this visualization that XYZ, who no longer is it's with the company, made?" And it's like, like it came.
Well, it also gives you, I think, someone who's an aspiring data visualization person, a great way to practice is to go out and find some of these charts, right? And they will have the reference at the bottom, and you can say, okay, I'm going to go get that data, and I'm going to recreate this chart, right?
Yeah.
And so that I find that's a great practice for folks, just to, you know, if you wanted to, like, say, get familiar with Matplotlib or any plotting package, right? Go out and try and recreate one of these plots, and, you know, you can go through this clear process, and it's going to expose you to maybe some of the warts or inconsistencies, but get you thinking about, you know, what should really be included in a visualization.
Yeah, I love this framework. I mean, just to summarize, to recap for our audience, so clear, C is color. And to me, that's like to declutter, right? Like make sure you don't have too many colors. You don't do the stuff that's confusing people. And then
but you can also pull people's attention, right? Like, another thing I like to tell people is like, close your eyes and then open them, and then pay attention to what you notice, right? And generally that color, like you're literally like controlling someone's attention with color.
Yeah.
So we recommend like using like a lot of grays and then like, I don't know, your standout color from that.
Yeah, depends on what you're trying to do, right? But a lot of time, like you just do this when you find a plot that you like, close your eyes, open it, like pay attention to where your eyes go, right? And oftentimes you will see some desaturated and then a saturated color, right? And your eyes are going to go, generally, I do this when I teach this, right? I'm like, everyone close their eyes, and then I want you to type into the chat, or if we're in live person, tell me what you focus on, right? And a lot of the times with these plots, it's the color, right? Often, other times it will be like there's a title, and the title's in bold, and my eyes went to that bold thing.
Yeah.
So and like, the color also has like the connotation with it too. I was just gonna say, when I worked at PwC, they were like, there's some people who were like, you have to use brand colors, and their brand colors were red, orange, and yellow. I'm just like, everything looks bad. Like you just open every dashboard, it's like things are positive, but it's like it's all red. And it's like, yeah, but it's on brand. It's like, no, dude, we gotta stop doing this.
Yeah, it's I mean that's an interesting limitation in itself. That's
Yeah.
wow,
I think
first
we
time.
got them off, some people off it, but some people were like, we have to, because, they're doing these decks and it'd be like competing against like Deloitte or something. Or like, don't use blue. Like, but it's such a
Yeah.
nice neutral color.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Like how
that is
these
a
are
challenge.
really like how these are spelled out. Like so C is for color,
Mhm.
so be intentional about it. L is for limited, which is limit your chart types and all that. Explain is the E, which is to annotate, to make your title to actually tell the story instead of, I guess, X versus Y variables, which is the default for every single plotting language libraries out
Mhm.
there. A is for audience, so be very clear about who you're speaking to. R is for reference, so that people don't actually question the data because you're very transparent about it. So, I mean, like, all of that speaks to me that you are trying to make the reader or whoever's looking at it as effortless as possible to get to what you're trying to say because they don't have to understand what this chart type is about. They already don't have to, like rethink why is this line red when it's positive. They don't
Mhm.
have to question the data. Oh, where is this coming from? You're already super transparent about it. And I mean, like, love that how the end outcome of all of these intentional steps that you just laid out effectively is like focusing people to, hey, just look at the story. Like everything else I've already answered for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people again are focused on how do I make a line plot, right? And they
Mhm.
focus so much on that that they forget about like what the purpose of the plot and visualization is.
So so you have these principles that are really good, and then now when you're putting it into practice, what's kind of like your process there? Is it like figure out what your final thing is going to be and then try and build it, or is it like put all the information in first and then start deleting, or something else?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of this is iterative, right? And so I'm a Python person. I'm generally living in Jupyter notebooks, either
Uh-huh.
Jupyter straight up or VS Code or something like that. But, oftentimes, remember that A is for audience. Oftentimes the audience is myself. I'm just doing exploratory data analysis, trying to sort of find out what's in the data because I want to make a model or do some prediction for a client, something like that. And, when I'm the audience, it can be like, this is a one-line thing and it's for me. But then oftentimes, if I'm making like a histogram or something like that, I might want to think about, okay, well, the default histogram has 10 bins. That's actually probably not a good number of bins. It's probably needs to be changed, right? And so how do I change that, right? And so there's some iteration, like in the book, I show different techniques that I use to sort of choose an appropriate number of bins. And depending on what your subject is, you might want to use one or a different method. Again, sort of like if I'm doing like dollar amounts, right, I might want to actually bin on like the quarter interval or something like that, right? But if I'm doing, something that's a floating point number, like, if you're talking about like internal combustion engines and like liters of displacement or something like that, then that's a floating point number. And maybe we want to bin that differently. And so I show different techniques for like looking at bins and trying to figure out what is telling my story,
Yeah.
what actually, and like histograms are actually kind of tricky because as you move the data along around or you change the bin locations, like you'll see what I call comb effects where like things will pop up because they like fall into a different bin.
Right.
You need to be careful that like there's actually like some sort of mode there or concentration there, and it's not just like you shifted an edge and things fell out of one bin and moved into another. And so there's a lot of back and forth to kind of think about what's telling the story. But then in the book I give a bunch of examples where I just sort of like say, okay, here's your basic, here's the data, we sucked it in, maybe we did some cleanup or we did pivoted it or something, and then here's your basic plot, generally audience of Matt, right? Where it might be like one line of code to plot it or a few lines of code, depending on what you want to do. But then it's like, okay, now let's assume that we're presenting this to someone else, right? And let's kind of go through this process thinking about, each of these letters and how we would apply them, right? And then sort of show the progression from, here's your out of the box bland plot
Yeah.
to a final product.
Matt, for people who are let's say like more of a novice in terms of like building very effective visualizations, how do they get to a point where they can themselves tell that this is a good visualization so that I should build up my how I learn about for example, the clear method to help me get there. Like, you know what I mean? Kind of like some people would be like, hey, if I know what the destination looks like, I can backtrack my way
Yeah.
to a path to get there. But probably a lot of people are like, hey, I made a plot. I don't know if it looks good. It looks good to me. Like,
Yeah.
how do they know?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I think a lot of people kind of want that path, right? They want like, here's the starting point and here's the end destination. But, when a lot of people are starting off with a visualization, they have like the starting point, but they might not be able to see where that end point is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I have a few thoughts about that. Obviously I'm biased since I wrote a book about like taking you through that process, right? So I do think like just in the book, I have a bunch of questions for each of the letters to sort of like force you to think about those things. So, if you don't have a title or a subtitle, you probably should have one because that's what real professionals do, right?
Okay.
Like the reference, it's like, yeah, you can put the reference on there. Is that going to change your plot? If you're sharing it with someone, right, it comes off as more authoritative if you can. But it's like, am I using a bar plot versus a line plot? I think a lot of that comes down to practice and intuition. This is sort of a thing I get with whatever I'm teaching, whether it's like, using testing frameworks in Python or like using new features of Python or like making predictive models or using pandas in my opinionated preferred ways. It's like you can read my book or take one of my courses, but after that the onus is really on you to like start incorporating that, right? And generally my recommendation to folks is find excuses to practice this. Like you said, you like started, before you were using different tools and you like wanted to use Python. So you like kind of force yourself to use Python to do that. I think that's great. Just finding excuses to use it. I think, like I said, recreating known good visualization. Just that process of going through that and recreating that. I think a lot of times, at least my experience with like working with professional programmers and data folks is that like we don't really practice that much. Like we write code or create things at work, but we don't really like intentionally practice. Like my kids play musical instruments, and like they have teachers that like hold your bow this way, right? Do this and do that. And I think a lot of times we don't get that practice. So I think recreating known good plots is just sort of like expose you to like, I'm going to like try and recreate this plot exactly. And as you do that, it's going to actually be painful and kind of annoying, regardless of what library you use. Like, because you're going to find out that like a lot of these things are either manual or like kind of a pain to do in whatever library, but it's going to like force you to think. It's like, why did they put the axis on the right-hand side when the default axis is on the left-hand side? Well, they put it over there because generally on a line plot is for temporal data, and generally you care about the end time, right? And so if you're looking at the end time, you want it right close to that. So it's on the right-hand side, right? But I don't know of any library that does that by default, has it on the right-hand side. They're all on the left-hand side, right? So it's like you go through this process of like recreating these things. And hopefully as you're doing that, you start thinking about things in a different way. One of the things that when I wrote my first book, I got a book that's called The Elements of Typography, I think is the name of the book. Anyway, it talks about like fonts and how books are laid out. It's kind of really nerdy. But one of the things that I didn't ever pay attention to was like kerning, which is how close letters are spaced out. And it's like,
okay.
like you would think that like letters just have, you just put them next to each other. But it's like, actually, if you have certain letters, they can like scoot in and out. And so a common one is like F and I. So F in a lot of fonts, if it's followed by I, the dot of the I is actually part of the F.
Okay.
And I hadn't really ever paid attention to that before,
Yeah.
like I went through like 30 years of my life without like ever noticing that. And then after it was pointed out to me, I'm like, oh, wow. And you see that all over the place. But if you never paid, if you're never like exposed to that, then you don't like think about that. So I think deliberate practice is a great way just to like force yourself to like do things and expose you to those things. One thing that would be nice is, if you had access to like a professional designer, right? Get that feedback from a professional designer, because a lot of us programmer data types aren't designers, right? And so if you can get some of that feedback from a professional designer where they might, give you some advice around maybe typography or colors or something like that, that can be useful. Also, if you go to like a lot of these websites for like the designers, they have like style guides. It's like, this is the font size that we use for the header. This is the font that we use. This is if it's bold or if it's not bold. These are the colors we use. These are the widths of the grid. I mean, they go down to like the details of like how many pixels or points things are, and what padding looks like. And so again, you can kind of dig into these things, but a lot of people just aren't. Again, they're just focused on, this is how you make a line plot. Here is a line plot, right? But a pro will sort of look at things from a different way and can often give you feedback in that way. And I don't think AI is there right now, right? I mean, maybe in the future it might be able to say like, you might consider doing. I mean, you could probably feed something in and ask it to do it. I don't know how good the advice would be on that right now, but maybe that's something that in a future release of some of these LLMs, they'll have capabilities to give better feedback and advice on something like that.
Yeah, feed in the image of the graph and be like, what do you think the point of this is? And if they get it wrong, you're like, okay, you're a product manager, you're an engineer, what do you think the point is? And it's like, okay, the engineer gets it, but the PM's not getting this graph yet.
Yeah, again, this is just a general practice, but I think practice getting that feedback from either someone who has the ability to give you good feedback or have some constraints that can help guide you and force you to think about things a slightly different way is a great way to start being able to self-evaluate.
Totally. I feel like we had a pretty good kind of process on that high when we worked together, where it was like, I would like share it with you, and then we would share it with like a few other data scientists. Then we'd share with like someone like from product who was like closer in and knew it wasn't like widely spread before. We're like, okay, we can like share this out and have some higher confidence that, okay, we'll understand what it's going to say.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like your approach, Matt, of like practice a bunch, look at a bunch of stuff, ask it questions why it looks good or it doesn't look good. I think and then get a designer. That's great. I mean, I've been roasted by designers before. I thought my chart was great, and then like a designer would come in like, I don't understand this, and I'm like, it's a line chart.
Yeah.
But that actually tells you something. So I feel like that's a great tip.
What are there any like very common mistakes you see that people like pretty much like everyone makes these, or like businesses often like overuse this thing or that thing?
I mean, general mistakes, just like histograms, using default style of histograms, data that has outliers. Oftentimes if you have an outlier in a histogram, you're going to have like a few blocks down here, and then it will just be like flat. You won't see anything. And then it's like, why does it look like that? Well, there's an outlier, right? Which is actually useful information, right? To know that there's an outlier, but, doesn't necessarily make that plot effective as a plot. Some other things that in just a lot of people will make a line plot and just use like the default colors of the lines, and it's like, it just looks like a mess. You can't really read it. So you kind of need to figure out like, okay, what story am I trying to tell, right? And, for example, a common one is like this plot that plots like the GDP versus the health of like countries. And it shows like the US spends a ton and doesn't have a better outcome, and all the other countries don't spend as much and have a better outcome, right? And so if you do a line plot of that and you just do every color, you just see like all these things go all over the place, right? But if the popular version of this is done by Our World in Data, data. And what they've done is they've gone back to that technique of like, okay, what are we trying to tell? We're trying to say that like the US really overspends, like something's going on there, and it's not getting a better outcome, right? So we want to focus the story on the US. So they include the other data, but it's just like very light gray. And the point is like, this is where all the other data is. It really doesn't matter what the country is or what's going on. But the US is like way over here, not even close to anyone else. So, and that tells the story. There are a bunch of countries there and you see the countries, but it doesn't really matter that they're different colors, right? They don't need to be separated because that's not the focus of the story. That's a common one with scatter plots. A common issue that I see is that, people will just throw on scatter plots and use like the default alpha or opacity, which is to be completely opaque. Like if I put a dot on, it's just, you can't see through it, which seems to be fine. But then if you have a lot of dots, what you see is just like a splotch of color, right? And so oftentimes, like I actually think scatter plots can reveal a ton about our information, but you need to be careful about how you use them, right? And so one of the things I like to do is like, I like sweep through values of sizes and opacities to kind of, as I'm doing that, I can see like, okay, when I change the opacity, you might see different clumps or clusters of the data that you can't see when everything's completely opaque, right? And so, tweaking those things that are like not included in the box tend to help us tell a better story or understand the data a little bit. And I get it. It's hard. Like it's hard to have like, what do you set the default values for like a histogram, right? And so, Matplotlib's like, well, we're just going to choose 10. And that's probably not the right answer for most things unless you have like a 10-point scale on something, right?
Yeah.
With bar plots, a common thing that for me is kind of a challenge is just, most people who are making plots these days using tabular data are using pandas. And I like, I wrote a book on pandas. I use pandas all the time. Pandas is like the lingua franca of data science, and people are using it for feeding machine learning models with data. But like when you do a bar plot with pandas and it has time series data, pandas actually changes the times to categoricals. So you get this weird thing where, you have the time series data, but then for the labels on that, they're not dates, they're categoricals. And so Matplotlib just treats them as we're going to print out every date as like the whole date. And so that can be problematic.
It's interesting. It's like a lot of work goes into trying to make the plot as simple as possible. It's like you're trying to, I don't know. It's like there's a lot of complexity to making something not complex.
Yeah, and if you look at the amount of lines of code to make something simple, it's a lot of lines of code.
Yeah.
Right. Which is probably another reason why a lot of people aren't. Well, I mean, I think there might be a few reasons. One is like Matplotlib, the API is can be weird, and oftentimes there's like 3 ways to do things, and they're all kind of different, and so that can be confusing or a challenge for folks. Another is that like the defaults aren't great. How do you make like to have defaults that please everyone is I think impossible. So you need to like tweak things to some degree. And then another one is just sort of like I think a lot of people feel like inadequacy with like artistic type things, right? And so I think if you can have some constraints that like sort of like teach you some best practices or some things to, even though you might not consider yourself an artist, but if you follow these steps, the end result is probably going to be a lot better or closer to something that's ideal.
Yeah.
Here's a business idea here, and for our audience, feel free to take it. Is we make an agent that that effectively is like the teacher of effective visualizations, like that integrates with your workflow, that tells you like, hey, your plot sucks, you should consider doing X, Y, and Z. Hey, you're missing this. Yeah, I mean, like all the to your point, Matt, like all the defaults are kind of nonsensical, right? Like for the most part. And so, why are they not AI-ified in the near future? And probably like very few people are even thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's another thing. Like people are like, I'm not a visualization person, or they might feel inadequate, or, programmers are like, what's the minimum I can do to get this out there? And so there's probably a lot of things that contribute to that. And, AI again, right now at least, my experience is that AI can sort of help you, but it's not fully automated. And even some of the Matplotlib things, if you try and do them with AI, it sometimes can not work, or it's like it doesn't really know how to do a lot of these things, at least the AIs that I'm using. So that sort of makes me wonder. I mean, I kind of have this idea of like, I think a lot of folks, to me, there's an interesting quote the other day that I read on LinkedIn. It was like, tabular data is the data that makes money, and like unstructured data is for things being viral, right? Like deep learning is sexy and
Interesting.
and you know, makes whatever Ghibli images and that sort of thing, but not necessarily. But like, you know, people who are, you have like some Excel spreadsheet or some database that have the crown jewels of their company in it, and they're using like XGBoost to make a really cool model to like whatever, do churn or predictions for their customers or their company or whatnot. And I think very few of that, like if you crown jewel, like if you've got a model around your crown jewels, that's not going in, it's not training data for AI, right? And I think there's a pretty big disparity of like what AI is getting trained on and like what's actually useful, if that makes sense. Like there's a lot of what I would say like newbie, naive, beginner level stuff where the AI is getting trained on that. And then like there's like this huge chasm of like, you can ask the AI to do it, but it's like a wasteland because it's like, I don't have any training data on that. And that's just my experience, like consulting with a lot of companies, like making XGBoost models and that sort of thing. Of like, they're like, we want to do this. And I think the same thing is kind of true with visualizations, where there's a lot of like, here's 20 things you can do with Matplotlib, right? There's a lot of these types of posts that go out there, but there's not a lot of like professional people who are using, maybe professionals don't use Matplotlib, maybe they're using ggplot, or maybe they're using Excel, or maybe they're using, you know, Illustrator or something to do this, right? But there's like a dearth of training examples for like how you do some of these other things. Like the AIs just don't know about them, right? Because there's no training data for it.
To that point, I think back to like when Hi and I were at Nextdoor, and I would say one of the most impactful dashboards was a Google sheet that was just like week over week, year over year numbers of some metrics, and they're red or green.
Uh-huh.
And it was so useful that there were other graphs that were like good line charts in Looker, and we're like, hey, can we pull this into Google Sheets? Like, it's just like it's like the simplest thing.
Yeah.
And it was like that like got shit done. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of, you know, I think people are often chasing something fancy or something that they see, but like there's, you know, simple basic stuff can be super powerful.
Yeah.
So your view on AI, I mean, one of our questions is around using LLMs to generate charts and stuff, like in this new era of the AI revolution. You probably you think that's pretty far away in terms of it being effective, right?
So I see a few problems right now. One is just that, like, I think for a lot of these, what I call professional plots or whatever, like that they are sort of manual, and so they require some back and forth. And I don't know that AI is smart enough to do that right now. At least not the AIs that I use. Maybe some other people have some fancier agents or something. But I mean, I feel like I try and track this stuff and are trying to use, like, whenever a new model comes out, I'm like trying the latest stuff. But like even so, I don't know. And again, that might go back to like a lack of training data for that. Again, there's a lot of content around here's 20 things to do with Matplotlib, but not necessarily like here's the process for going through and like cleaning up a book, cleaning up a chart, right? And so the AIs don't really know how to do a lot of that stuff. So you know, could it get there? I mean, yeah, it could. I think some of these, you know, AIs coming out with larger context windows. You know, I've sort of thought like, oh, maybe I just feed in the content of my book as a, you know, into the context window and
There you go.
use that. But I see this. Again, sample size one, but I see this with visualization. I see this with like pandas, polars. I see this with XGBoost, which, you know, my focus tends to be the tabular Python side.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing that the AIs currently can do the basic stuff. They're fine with doing the basic stuff. But once you sort of go beyond the basic stuff, I'm seeing a lot of hallucinations or just can't do it or giving you garbage as a result.
Yeah,
So
I see that agents will just like go off the rails sometimes where I'll be like, can you like change this to XYZ? And then it just like finds some other like bug in the code and just start going off. And I'm like, what the hell is it doing? Like, how did we go from like 30 lines of code to 120? Like, wait, and then you just like can't even trust like what it is. So I think we're
yeah.
still safe for a little while.
Yeah, I think we're safe for a little while. I mean, it's possible that we have like some of these specialized AIs, and maybe that's, where we sort of say like, okay, I'm going to like have a very opinionated AI, and maybe we're going to use these larger context windows to like feed in like, I want you to write Matplotlib code in this style, right? Or I want you to write XGBoost using these tools and techniques, or pandas or polars, right? And not do it in the way that you're sort of trained to do it. That could be interesting. Right now, I'm not afraid of that. I mean, again, like these AI mod. So people ask me as like an educator, am I afraid of AI? And it's like, yeah, I'm not really afraid of it right now, because I think people want that opinionated path. I mean, you could ask AI to generate an opinionated path, but I think, whether that's actually good or not. And I feel like you want someone, at least for me, you want someone who's going to like say, hey, watch out for this, right? And like take you on this course, which, possibly AI can do that in the future. But yeah, right now it's not really capable of doing that.
Cool. Awesome. I mean, we'll have you for a part 2 in maybe like a year or
Yeah,
so,
maybe I'll
and
have to
we'll ask you the
eat
same
crow.
question.
Yeah, or your AI deep fake that you'll have, trained on your books by then.
Yeah, actually, I'm not talking to you. I'm an AI.
That's awesome. Cool. We just passed an hour in our recording, so I think this is a good place to wrap. Thank you so much, Matt. One last question for you that we ask every guest, which is, and maybe there's a bias here already, what is the number one, is it underrated skill that a data professional should learn or should have?
Yeah. Again, I do think it's communication, especially with AI these days. A lot of, yeah, AI can do basic things for you, right? But you want to A, understand the business, and then B, be able to communicate that back. And there are ways to do that are useful, and there are ways that are not useful. And your boss, I mean, the reason why your boss hires you is to summarize and communicate these results to them, right? That you would think that your boss has the capabilities of doing what you want, or has your skills often. Maybe they're better at managing, but oftentimes your boss is in a position they are because they have shown excellence in these skills, and now they're sort of like helping other people. And so part of their job is to say, okay, I want you to answer these questions for me. I want you to do the work for me. And if your boss already knows how to do it and they can get AI to do it for them, then that's kind of a sad proposition for you. Right. But I do think like the communication is super important, whether that's, with a machine learning model, or communicating the value proposition of that, or telling a story with data and making change at a company that could be extremely useful.
Awesome. Mic drop.
Yeah, I think you just got us to I think we're at if not 100%, we're at like a 99% hit rate of communications, the most underrated skills. Thank you for adding to our eventual compilation of everyone saying communication in some future video.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool.
You want me to close out? Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Well, Matt, super helpful conversation. I think especially for anyone who's like invested a bunch of time in their like analysis just to release some chart and like wondering why no one cares about what they're sharing out. That's definitely happened to me before. Yeah, before we close, anything in terms of like where people can follow your work, learn more about effective visualization, or like all the other things you teach about?
Sure. Yeah. I'm on a lot of social platforms, LinkedIn, probably most appropriate for this discussion, but also my website is metasnake.com. And I've got a mailing list there where I occasionally share nuggets, but you can stay in contact with me there as well.
Cool. Great. We'll drop those in the show notes below.
Awesome. Thanks for
so
having
much.
me.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Matt.
Oh,
Thanks.
and don't forget to like and subscribe and comment and all of that other YouTube stuff. See you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.